Welcome to The Wing, the emotional and financial health check you never knew you needed.
Hello there, ladies, and welcome to another episode of The Wing. Today we have our very first guest joining us, and that is Ashleigh Kuhn. Hi, Ash.
Hi, I'm so excited to be here. Thanks for having me.
My pleasure. It's great to have you. Ash and I have known each other for many years. We worked together a few years ago in the marketing space over a couple of clients that we shared. We've got a ton of mutual friends as well. And we've more recently started working together in a different capacity whereby Ash is my nutritionist for my pregnancy and for my final pregnancy, and after this pregnancy as well. I'll be working with Ash too. So far it's been a very informative journey, and that is what prompted me to want to get Ash onto the podcast and share some of her knowledge and her skill set with our listeners, so that you can sort of take part in what Ash is teaching me every day and every week about food, about nutrition, about calories, fiber, protein, all the things that you think you know something about and turns out you don't know anything about any of them. But Ash is there to tie it all up. So what I might do as well is just give the mic to Ash just to give a bit of an intro on yourself and your business.
Yeah, cool. Thank you. So, yes, I'm a nutrition coach for busy mums. I'm also a mum myself. I have Freddie, who's 3 now, which is such a fun age. And I run a business called No Nonsense Nutrition and Fitness with my husband, James Kuhn. And we basically work with busy people who kind of want to get the most or the biggest return on investment for the efforts they're putting into their training and nutrition. So as you said, used to work in comms, and then I've kind of always been interested in health and fitness, but I certainly found that when I was trying to get pregnant with Freddie, in pregnancy, postnatally, I was like, wow, this is a different game in terms of how challenging some of these things can be. So that's kind of what I guess pulled the trigger for me to want to work with mums specifically around nutrition and fitness as well.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's so obvious, like in the way, I mean, I obviously follow your content on social and, see you sort of being so active with Freddie and, sharing recipes and your different tips and tricks. And it's very clear that, you've been on this pregnancy and motherhood journey yourself, which was honestly a big part of what attracted me to you and working in this space, was because I knew that you'd done it, you'd been there, you understood from woe to go and all of the different changes that happen in the female body before, during, and after pregnancy, and how a lot of that, a lot of your hormones and a lot of the way you feel about yourself and about food can be impacted by having things in place like a weekly meal plan and, having a better understanding on what food to buy and what to stock your fridge and pantry with and what food to feed yourself and your kids and your partner. It's kind of the whole package when it comes to you. So yeah, I think let's dig into some of the things that you know about. I saw you post something very interesting on Instagram, and I personally wanted to know a lot more about it. So your post was tagged as propaganda I'm not falling for as a nutritionist and a mum. Now, some of the things on your list included no coffee on an empty stomach, worrying about seed oils, organic food, cycle syncing, I've never heard of that, weights make you bulky, cortisol face, toning workouts, being a high-performing woman, and then you added some other things in the comments section, which was fasted cardio, carnivore diet, unnecessary exclusion of food groups, demonizing artificial sweeteners, diet culture, food shaming, medical misogyny, or any misogyny really. I did have a little giggle at that one. Perpetual mum guilt, creatine gummies, and cheat days. Now, I feel like we could do a podcast on every single one of those topics, but feel free to just freestyle and tell us about the post and pull out your main bits and pieces and why you actually posted this, and tell us more about some of these terms that I'm sure we've all heard.
Yeah, cool. So I saw this was like a trending post. I was actually pretty late on the trend, to be honest. And it's kind of a bit divisive, but I really like it in the nutrition space because there's a lot of things, like we just get so bombarded with information. And a lot of the women that are coming to me like, oh my God, there's so much information out there. I just don't know what's true. I don't know what to believe, what approach to follow. And so I liked the trend and how it applies to this, because I think that there's so much of it that kind of doesn't matter, to be honest, or is like really like a tiny detail when most people are kind of like missing the forest for the trees, right? So like some of the things that are there are like pretty nitty-gritty nutrition things. So when we're talking about like organic food or like timing of caffeine and that sort of stuff, conversations can be important to have. But like we also know that like in Australia, 6.5% of people, of adults, are eating the recommended amount of vegetables. And I think around like 20 to 25% are doing the recommended amount of exercise. So I think that there are just like much more kind of important things to talk about, as opposed to getting into like these small details, which often are actually kind of misleading. So for example, coffee on an empty stomach is a really funny one, because a lot of the time when I meet with women, a few women have said this to me, like, oh, the first thing I do when I wake up is have my coffee before my breakfast. I know that's so bad. And it's like, is it? Why? And it's kind of one of those things that's really shown on social media is like, oh, I think a lot of the narrative around it is like, it's really bad for your hormones. It causes this big cortisol spike. Whereas like we know cortisol fluctuations are very normal for most people. We have things like clinical conditions where cortisol can be more of a concern. But for the vast majority of people, it's not really a worry. For women to be like apologizing almost to me for that on a call is like, it's a bit alarming to me, because it's obviously something that has just been projected so much on social media that it becomes almost like fact, when actually it is not factual. And also like a lot of things, it's very nuanced and individualized. I have caffeine. That's the first thing I do when I wake up. I have a black coffee on an empty stomach. And it's fine. I've been doing it for years. We know that like with caffeine, the effects diminish over time for a lot of people. So like initially, if you started doing that and you hadn't before, you could have a big cortisol spike. You might feel really anxious and feel your heart race, but over time, the body kind of adapts and the effect lessens. We won't go into too much detail, but basically I would say for most people, that's probably not one to worry about.
And mentioning cortisol, so I know cortisol to be if I got the wording right, the stress hormone. I learned a lot about this when I was managing gestational diabetes the last 2 pregnancies. I'm still waiting to find out if I got that again, but I know that can affect, like, when you get up, you have a natural blood sugar spike and a cortisol spike, because your body that's a way of waking you up to get into your day. And then obviously if you layer that on with a coffee and your body's not used to it, like you said, then it might take a little while for the effects to lessen. But would it be a case of that the caffeine doesn't then, is it contributing to stress? And you sort of touched on that. You said sometimes with existing cortisol conditions that perhaps the caffeine on an empty stomach can make it worse, make those conditions worse. Is it sort of like stress conditions, anxiety, that type of diabetes, perhaps?
Yeah, I think there's a little bit of interplay with diabetes. Mainly I'm talking about Cushing's syndrome, which is like, which is like a disease that, we probably won't go into the specifics because it's not applicable for most people. But like for the large majority of people, it's not going to be a huge issue. When we start talking about like blood sugar spikes, then obviously we're talking about if you're not eating for like a prolonged period of time, that could be a concern. But I think mostly what people are talking about here is this kind of like cortisol spike as being something that's really negative and something that we want to avoid, when we know like the time your cortisol is highest is actually when you wake up in the morning. As you said, it's the body's way of kind of like naturally waking people up. And so I think some of the argument is like, oh, well, it spikes that even further, and then you'll feel like this crash. And this cortisol crash is what a lot of people talk about when we know that cortisol fluctuates throughout the day, and that's normal and natural. And actually, another thing that can make your cortisol spike is a morning training session. And so we're not telling people to avoid doing that, especially busy mums, because that's a lot of the time, the best time for them to be able to work out in terms of their schedule. A lot of us could probably actually afford to focus a bit less on cortisol spikes and just think about what's kind of making you feel best in the morning. Like if you're someone who wakes up and has a coffee and you're feeling gut irritation, you've got to go to the toilet all of a sudden, you're feeling, anxious, your heart's racing, you might be sensitive to caffeine, and you probably want to maybe avoid having that so early or without food or whatever the case may be. But for most people, if you're not experiencing a problem, you don't necessarily need to be concerned by it just because it's something that you've seen. And I think it kind of started, Andrew Huberman, the Huberman Lab podcast, that's really big.
Oh, yes. Yeah.
I think it kind of kicked off there, and it's kind of like snowballed this like, oh, you've got to wait 60 to 90 minutes to have a coffee. And it's like, well, it's not really going to impact you that much. It's not worth stressing about necessarily.
And like you said, it's a case-by-case basis. It's not, if something is working for you, if it's not broke, don't fix it. And as you said, those stats you mentioned earlier, those are very small percentages of the population that are actually moving and eating in a correct kind of manner. So to be focusing on these little sort of, for lack of a better word, fads or things that kind of pop up on our Instagram reels every now and again, or, on random content platforms that, they're not the things to actually be focusing on. I mean, there's been one in particular that I keep seeing, which is cortisol face. And it's that really caught my eye when you posted that, because I thought, what is it? Do I have it? Like you wake up in the morning and you don't look your best and you're like, oh, is it my sleep or is it that cortisol face?
Well, yes. I mean, it's kind of funny. So basically, like, the kind of headline here is that it's not something that's recognized by like the medical community. It's not something that I think has a significant amount of evidence behind it. And I think a lot of the time the way it's used in social media is kind of in like healing your gut, healing your hormones, this kind of like narrative, like ways that I've healed my hormones, and people talk about calming their cortisol spikes and that sort of thing. We know that there is, you can have, like, we all know it. Like you said, when you wake up in the morning and you might feel like a bit puffy in your face. So things like fatigue, salt intake, alcohol, hormones, there are lots of things that can cause water retention in your body, and that includes your face, right? Typically that is like acute. It's not chronic, so it's in the moment, and we'll see like as you go through your day, it's probably gonna like reduce. That's kind of different to what people are talking about with cortisol face. And I think one of the things that is a little bit alarming for me is that often when people talk about it, they'll have a photo of their face like kind of like rounder. I have a really round face, so I was like, is it my cortisol? But no. And then they'll have them, looking like more slim, like less inflamed, often they will say, right? And what's typically happened there is fat loss and aging, both things that reduce roundness in the face. Probably more likely to be those things as opposed to like inflammation from cortisol. And often those people are also selling like a program or something like
product.
That. Yep. So it's probably worth considering like, what's the message here? What are they trying to get me to do or buy into? Because a lot of the time there is an element of that there as well.
Yeah, absolutely. It sounds like someone's coming to get us so that we stop talking about all this propaganda.
But man,
it's okay. There's some little people in the background on my end that are yelling out, "Mummy, mummy!" But they're not by themselves. They're with my mum. So it's just our lives, right? Mum life. Yeah. Oh my God, that's so funny. Okay, so as I said, some of these things I had heard of before, and some of these things that were brand new information to me. Maybe there's some truth to some of this propaganda, and then it's just being exacerbated by social media or different messaging. And as you said, it can snowball into these other messages that they're losing the point. So one of those things would be worrying about seed oils. So seed oils I'm not familiar with. So maybe you could talk us through what they are.
So it's kind of like just what it sounds like. So like canola oil, soybean oil, a lot of like the kind of vegetable oils. I do feel like I'm in a bit of a bubble in terms of like the wellness space in social media. So some of these things might be not as familiar to people, but personally I'm being bombarded by this type of content where like, should we be worried about seed oils? As you said, we could probably do like a full podcast episode. This one in particular gets quite like sciencey and very like nitty gritty in terms of some of like the mechanisms in the body and that sort of thing. But basically there's kind of the story that is kind of being told is that, these oils are more like oxidized. They're causing, again, inflammation in the body, contributing to disease or obesity and this sort of thing. Basically, the research doesn't support that. We actually know that replacing some of the saturated fats with these kind of vegetable oils in your diet can are linked to reducing cardiovascular risk. So there are actually some health benefits. And it's kind of like when we start talking about like this oil, that oil, again, it's kind of like missing the forest for the trees, because actually what we see with our clients often is that oils can actually really add up over the day and kind of contribute to a calorie surplus and undermine people's fat loss efforts or like health efforts. So for example, I'm sure you've seen like in a lot of healthy cooking shows, people will just like slather olive oil all over everything. And we know like olive oil is great, not a seed oil, but it is really healthy, same as some of these seed oils. But we probably just don't want to overdo it in general, because that's not going to be beneficial for your health either. So again, it's like seed oils are fine, but probably look at moderating your use of oil generally. We want to get like a healthy amount of fat, but we don't want to overdo it, which is really easy to do.
Like you said, it's confusing. We are being bombarded with all of this information, and it's really difficult to navigate and figure out, oh, seed oils, is that something I should be paying attention to? Like that is actually probably a question that you'd probably find me messaging you about on as part of our nutrition plan and our coaching relationship. Oh, hey, Ash, should I be looking at this? And then you would basically just send me the link to this podcast and say, no, don't worry about it.
Don't worry about it.
Yeah.
And that's really nice. That's a really nice part of my job, to just be able to be like I could send you, the systematic reviews and the studies, but it's quite nice just to be able to be like, no.
Well, absolutely. And recently, and this is a good one for our listeners as well, is that as part of the coaching program, so we're like on a weekly program with Ash. So luckily I've got access to her every day. I try not to, be too annoying, but the point of the relationship is so that Ash can actually help me through navigating what's in my fridge and pantry. So I literally went through my pantry and some of our fridge items and took photos of them and sent them to Ash and said, these are the like staple items that we have in the pantry and the fridge all the time. How could I be shopping differently? And in particular, I'm not hitting my fiber and my protein goals consistently, like each day. And that's obviously really important. It's really important in normal life, but it's super important during pregnancy. So Ash was able to help me navigate my own shopping items and give me alternatives and say, right, well, you've got, this particular muesli bar, but this one's a high protein option. It takes out the guessing for me by speaking with a professional and being able to have that contact and lean on your knowledge and then shop accordingly. So I try not to shop in the supermarket for a few reasons, because I have two little people and I don't like taking them to the shops, and I don't think they like going with me. And also to save money and be really specific on what I'm actually purchasing. And then, you've got the nice bought before section on your app, so I can go through and do things. So it was really helpful for me to have a better understanding of the foods that we do order regularly, and then, lean on Ash's expertise so that she can filter out all of the junk for me, and I can just focus on, okay, well, that's easy now. All I do is shop for it. It turns up, we eat it, and we repeat it. I think that all ties into, just knowing what to look for and focusing on what's actually important for me personally and what's important overall, and trying not to get pulled in by different fads and different product marketing and, everything that we see every day. Now, another part of this is, there's probably two parts. So weights make you bulky and toning workouts. So they're probably linked. Can you talk to us a little bit about the two of those topics?
Yeah, for sure. They're definitely linked. I'm seeing a lot of this at the moment, probably with like the rise in popularity of Pilates. And like, don't get me wrong, Pilates is great, but I just think we need to be a little bit careful when we talk about toning, because it's like, what does that mean? Typically that means growing a bit of muscle and losing a bit of body fat, right? And have you heard about this like long, lean muscles? Like, do you hear that language?
Yes, long, lean muscles. And for me, I'm 5 foot. I mean, I am pregnant, so I probably need to go a little bit easy on myself. But long, lean muscles, I'm like, how am I ever going to get those? Like, come on. Like, I'm just not built for it.
So we know that you can like grow a muscle, and like you can also, if you don't use it over time, obviously it kind of atrophies or decreases in size. But you can't actually change like the length of your muscle or your body shape. Really, like we can change your body shape in terms of fat gain, but in terms of like your actual structural shape, you can't change that. It's genetic, right? And I think it's kind of perpetuating this like ideal body type, and that's never a healthy thing. We kind of want to steer away from that. For me, example, I have really broad shoulders. If I start trying to be like a petite, lean woman, who looks like another woman. It's like, but structurally I have bigger shoulders. I can't look like that. You know what I mean? And I think that it kind of feeds into that. So I don't love that language because it's misleading and it's also not helpful, right? It's actually very hard to get bulky, like to grow bulky muscle. As someone who trains regularly in the gym and who tries in some ways to get bulkier, it's hard. Like, you're not going to start weight training and wake up the next day and be like, oh my God, I've turned into a bodybuilder. Like, that just doesn't happen. So I think that it's something that discourages women sometimes from weight training. And weight training is one of the best things that we can do for our health, especially as women into our old age. Not only does it make you look great, like I think often when we look at women who have these like beautiful bodies that we maybe to aspire to, often they actually have more muscle than we probably realize. That muscle has taken a long time to grow. It's just really good for protecting you against being frail in your old age, against falls. We know that there's like quite a big mortality risk with falls for women in old age. So it's really important to kind of engage in activities that protect against that. We know that resistance training is really good for our bone health, for building muscle, which gives us independence for longer. So it's just like a really beneficial activity for your health, but also for the way that you look. Like, most women, I think, would really feel quite confident and strong if they gained a little bit of muscle. So I just don't love that that language kind of deters people from doing this like really great behavior. I also know for me, it's been very helpful postnatally to get back into the gym, to have that time for myself where it's like committed to working on my strength. Like, that's so empowering for me, feeling independent, because I think sometimes we lose some of that through pregnancy. It can be a really difficult experience. So being able to get into the gym, work on yourself, work on your strength, I think is really beneficial for mums in particular.
Absolutely. And I think you're right. It's that language, like the word bulky, like, we all paint a little picture in our heads of what bulky looks like. So it's not, and it can have negative connotations. And I think as well, there's a link between what we see in ourselves and then what we're looking at on the scales. And I think most people know that muscle weighs more than fat, but it's really hard to, when you're on a weight loss journey or you're on going the other way and you're on a pregnancy journey, either way, your weight is moving in one of those two directions. One of the things that I was saying to you, Ash, is that, so I'm weighing myself every morning as part of this program as well. And it was a habit I was doing before anyway, but as I started to put on weight, I was creeping up to a weight range that, while I was eating leaner, obviously I'm pregnant, so I'm going to be putting on weight. But I was getting into a weight range that was making me uncomfortable, and Ash brought it to my attention. You said something along the lines of that those weights might have been triggering me, or like making me think of a time where I wasn't overly happy with my weight, but changing my mindset on it. Measuring my actual weight on the scales is for a practical reason, so we can monitor the journey. And then when I've had the baby and we go back the other way, that, we've got reference points kind of thing along the way. But then how that thinking ties into exercise and thinking, oh, if I build a heap of muscle, then I'm going to be heavier on the scales. And then that can also be a deterrent for people.
Yeah. We like to talk about positive weight gain, which almost feels like a paradox, like two opposite things, because we're so conditioned to think that any kind of weight gain is awful and we need to be perpetually seeking weight loss. And like, that's the thing. Most of the women I work with, we're trying to dismantle some of this like diet culture beliefs and narratives that are really limiting. And sometimes we don't even realize that we have them until, you hop on the scales and you're like, oh God, I've reached this weight. And it's like, you're pregnant. But for other people, like often we see people gain weight at the end of a diet, and it's not necessarily like fat regain. It's because they start increasing the amount of carbs that they're eating, which is great. Carbs are really important for performance. I love to see women eating at maintenance, an amount of food that makes them feel energized and really healthy. And so with extra carbs, we see basically like water stored with glycogen in the muscles. So that is like a positive weight gain because you're going to be feeling really good. It's going to help your performance. It's great. But when you step on the scales and you see weight gain, it's like these alarms start going off in your head because for your whole life, you've kind of been conditioned to think that weight gain is bad. An important part of coaching for me, and something that's really big for me, is relationship with food. Like, I always want to leave women in a better place than I found them in terms of relationship with food, because a lot of the time we do have these negative associations and beliefs, or, like tricky things, tricky habits or patterns of behavior that come up. And it's so common. Like recently I was working with a client and she was like, oh, I think she said she wasn't eating carbs basically. And I was like, why aren't you eating carbs? And she's like, oh, if I have a loaf of bread in the house, I'll just eat it all. I'm like, will you? Like plain bread? Is that true? And then so, kind of like testing food beliefs like that, like, oh no, actually I can have, some avocado and some whole grain toast with like a protein shake. And that's like a really healthy, delicious meal that I enjoy. And that's okay. It's okay to eat bread. And like, it's not, it's these things these associations we have that aren't true. They're not helpful. I think it's really important to kind of like break them down and think about them and confront them in a way too.
Yeah, I think it's you provide a really nice space and forum to you hold the mirror back up at us and say, well, you can still have that. And like you said, a lot of what you're teaching me in our program is that, still do the things you enjoy. If you're hungry, eat. It's about making mindful choices and having different ideas. Obviously, one of the biggest things that's been an absolute game changer for me is that you got me onto the Herman Brot protein bread and the buns. So being able to swap that out, making homemade burgers or for toast, things like that, that is something I just would never have been privy to, or I would have been standing in the supermarket playing a guessing game and thinking, oh, is this good or is that good? So yeah, having you as a coach there to be able to, give feedback and reassure us and debunk that thinking, like you said, that we've been, socialized or to, think and feel that certain way about different foods and exercise and body image and all that type of things.
Also, like you were talking about with pregnancy in particular, it's funny because we have all these food aversions. And so, you think about like protein. What do you think about when you think about protein? You're probably thinking about meat and like protein shakes as well, which are fine. But often pregnant women are like, oh, I didn't want to eat any meat when I was pregnant. I was quite repulsed by the idea. And so bringing in things like, well, we can have this protein enriched bread. And then on top of that, we can put, something else that has protein and kind of like work it into a really helpful way. I think sometimes it's nice to have someone like outside who can look at your diet and be like, oh, actually, we can fix this problem with this solution that isn't going to make you feel sick, like, or a win. And, kind of recommend some particular things for that. It can be helpful.
Yes, absolutely. There's so many different phases of life that women in particular go through. You're in high school and body image is huge in high school. You're wanting to fit in, you're starting to like boys or girls, or you're starting to fit into society and understand how the world works. And all this time you've got raging hormone changes and friendship group changes, and then you're also mindful of how you're looking, and that forms a lot of that part of your life. And then you move into your early 20s when you're exploring the world, and you might be traveling and meeting new people and starting relationships and going through that phase, and then that's a whole different sort of basket again. And then move into sort of your later 20s, and this is I'm probably mostly referencing myself here.
No, I think this is true for many of them. I'm like, yes, 100%.
Yeah. Well, that's good. I'm not alone. Yay. And then you move into your later, mid to late 20s, and you're sort of thinking about marriage and kids and, what that next chapter looks like. And then for some, you move into that chapter and, then, stepping into motherhood. I think I fell face first into motherhood. But that's how it felt anyway. Going through the pre-pregnancy, like trying to get pregnant journey, getting pregnant, carrying the baby, having the baby, and then, everything that happens after that. And there's just so many transitions in our lives that, that we go through. But if we have this if I had this education when I was in my teens and I'm trying to, fit in and do all that stuff, and then I'm going and getting a sausage roll at the canteen at lunchtime, like obviously I knew that wasn't the best food choice, but you know, if we have that education earlier in life, it's something that we can carry through with us. And maybe it is a case of, all right, well, this is us as mums debunking our own thinking so that we can pass on quality information and good food education to our kids and break the cycle that we have become a part of from generations before us.
It's so true. And, you know, like it does come into like how you eat as a family. It also comes into like preconception nutrition and nutrition in pregnancy. Like something that I find so fascinating is that your baby can actually like taste your amniotic fluid, right? And there's some research to show that like if you're eating vegetables through pregnancy, it changes that flavor and that can skew their food preferences. So I wish I had the exact study in front of me to reference, but basically, like if you're exposing your baby to these kind of like bitter flavors, think like a carrot or like, you know, greens, then they're more familiar with those flavors. And so once they're eating solids, they're more receptive to those foods.
Fascinating.
Yeah, all of these elements and even epigenetics, like things like studies around like women who were pregnant in famines, who then like it changes the genetics of their children. So they're more likely to be obese because they're clinging on to that food. So it's just like, it's so fascinating. But I love what you've just said about kind of dismantling that diet culture for our kids. I think that is like so important, and being able to recognize that early on in your kind of like motherhood journey and, you know, maybe challenge some of those beliefs and the way that you're eating and living sets such a good example for your family. And that's one of the things I love about working with you is I know that that's really important for you. It's not just about you, it's about your family. And I love that.
Yeah, everything that I'm learning with you, Ash, is that, yeah, I'm able to then project it. That's probably the wrong word, but like, you know, have it in the house and in a positive way for Jake and for the kids and be more educated. So it's not a case of, you know, because I see it a lot. I see it happen a lot. I see it happen in my own house with different family members in particular. I don't think friends typically say as much, but family is usually a little bit more honest with you. But, you know, if, you know, our kids are reaching for a certain product or a certain food type, or, oh, should they be eating that? Oh, no, they can't have that. Oh, they can't have this, or they can't, you know, it's that sort of, well, now I feel like I'm able to eliminate those comments even and that commentary because I know that everything that's in front of the kids is something that they are 100% happy to eat. And if they're going to eat a piece of cake or, you know, on a birthday, on an occasion, that it's not the end of the world because it's not their normal diet. That education piece, and it's really assisting me to kind of stamp out that narrative and go, no, that's fine for them to eat. No, you don't need to question me on everything. Whereas before I had this food education, I'm no pro, but just on the things that you've taught me so far, I've now got that confidence to be able to, like, before I wouldn't have been confident enough to say, oh, because I'd be like, oh yeah, maybe they shouldn't eat that, or oh,
Yeah.
okay. Oh, yeah, no, fair enough. Okay, no, no cake ever, like not until they're 5. Or, and you always get those stories like, well, you didn't eat cake until you were 5. Well, you didn't eat this and that. Auntie Cheryl gave it to you, and I was furious, like that. Those types of stories that you hear, like it's not just about the food; it's about that pressure that you can get.
People like project onto you their beliefs and their insecurities about it. And like, look, I'm going to be honest, like James and I are 2 nutritionists and we sometimes don't know how to get it right with Freddie in terms of food. Like it's really tricky. Do the best that you can. I think we're all doing the best that we can, but definitely challenging some of those maybe beliefs, and especially where they relate to diet culture. Like one of the things that's been so interesting for me is like going out with Freddie to like a cafe and having sharing a piece of cake. I never, like before I had a kid, I would never have just have gone to a cafe and had a piece of cake. And like, that's kind of messed up. There's nothing wrong with that. You know what I mean? Like it's one of life's joys. And like, that's part of a healthy relationship with food is being able to enjoy these foods that you love, like more special foods or whatever the case may be. And I love that at home, you know, Freddie eats like, he likes to snack on like edamame and black beans, like bless him. But he'll also, like that kid can put away cake like nothing else. And I love that, you know, he kind of gets both of those experiences because you never want to be too restrictive or kind of go the other way. So it's tricky for all of us.
Absolutely. And it doesn't help when toddlers throw their food on the floor or throw it at you, and they tell you they like it one day and they don't the next. So that's a whole other.
That they had like 3 servings of fish curry, and you're like, you're lying to me. Like, no way.
Fish curry, that kid lives off edamame beans.
And Vegemite toast.
Vegemite toast. He's not eating fish curry. It's just certainly not 3 serves of it. Oh, absolutely. Now, Ash, in the spirit of time and keeping these podcasts bite-sized, I think we need to catch up more regularly and record some more pods, because there's still so many burning questions that I have in relation to this post, but also just in health in general. But instead of digging too much deeper today, and as I said, we will do more recordings so that we can, learn as much as possible from you. But I want to give you the floor and give you a chance to explain to the listeners, like, do your sales pitch, like tell us about the business and how, if anybody wants to engage with you and get you as part of their team, how would they go about that? And what are the perks?
Yeah, for sure. That's such a great question. So mainly in our business, we do one-on-one coaching. That's kind of our bread and butter. And I think it works so well for mums because, like, just what we've talked about, having someone be able to look at you specifically and what you need and how to do it, because it's so hard in motherhood. Like, I think, especially if you've come from someone who feels like you've been able to control things really well before with your training and nutrition, when you had more freedom and flexibility, and then you stepped into motherhood and you're like, oh my God, this is so overwhelming. How can I still manage to prioritize my health and make it all fit? I think it is really helpful having someone in your corner. Like, I definitely am, I think, a bit of a cheerleader for all of my clients, but also love to give them some direction and reassurance and kind of help them identify and dismantle some of the things we've talked about today. But yes, people can follow me on Instagram. I'm Nutrition by Ashleigh, and our business is called No Nonsense Nutrition and Fitness. And I'm taking clients at the moment. I love to work with mums in particular. I have, like, not all of my clients are mums. I love working with all women, but I definitely feel like that's my kind of jam. And it's funny, I find myself working a lot with women who've maybe done coaching before, even with my husband, James, and then they've had a baby and been like, well, this is quite tricky. And they kind of need someone who gets it. And I also think, I think I'm a very empathetic and compassionate person. And I think that a lot of women need that as mums, like maybe some tough love sometimes, but mostly just someone who kind of gets it and understands and can empathize and kind of point them in the right direction. And that is what I love doing.
Absolutely. And I definitely think that's been one of my favorite parts of working with you, is that I don't ever feel judged. I'm in a very vulnerable state, like obviously being pregnant, and I know that that's just going to continue, into the postpartum period or into that 4th trimester. So having you around as a sounding board and a support and a knowledgeable resource is so valuable, because I'm able to not only manage the physical, parts of pregnancy. Obviously, I'm trying to hopefully not get gestational diabetes again, and not gain any unnecessary fat during the pregnancy. So those are some of the physical, practical, things that I'm benefiting from learning about food and nutrition and movement with you. But also just, like you said, having that person there that's a sounding board, that's a safe space to discuss some really intimate thoughts and concerns and trying to debunk it all so that, I'm on a good trajectory. So I can speak firsthand and say I highly recommend Ash and her husband James. He did a workout program for me, so I've started that, which is great. But as I said, I think we've got so many more topics to cover, Ash, and we'll go into some more of the bits and pieces on your post that I loved. But in the meantime, please follow Ash on Instagram. I'm also going to include her details as part of this podcast post, so that you'll be able to find her easily and book in to speak with her and see if you guys are a match.
Thank you so much.
Thank you for being on the podcast, Ash, and for all of our listeners, thank you for tuning in, and stay tuned because we will have Ash back again in the future. If you have any questions or any bits of information or that you would like to know more about, feel free to message me as well, and Ash and I can workshop in the background and perhaps create some content or an entire podcast about it if it's interesting enough.
Love that.
Yes, great. All right. Well, thank you, everybody. We hope you enjoyed this episode of The Wing, and we will catch you again soon.